since like 1997. I've had the same phone company since 1997. So you would think after all of these years, you could walk in there and say, here's my phone. I need a phone. Now, I had a phone, as you guys know, that had chunks coming out of the back of it. So never had a broken phone before. And just, transfer over the numbers, give me my phone and let me walk out. No. Um, Literally 2.5 hours because you couldn't get the phone to work. They had to take the chip out and go put it in another phone. And then they had left my chip in the other phone. And it was hilarious. And plus, I had an appointment with my son-in-law's friend. So, of course, we had to tell stories the whole time we were sitting there. It was quite interesting. So, the one bad thing about getting a new phone, because the last phone I had was a iPhone 13, they've literally changed everything. The buttons aren't the same. I have no clue what I'm doing. And you guys know I'm IT challenged anyway. I'm like, where's that button at? What did they do with that button? So, anyway, it's been a crazy day. So, plus, I'm trying to help Dwayne Cates buy a house. So I had some stuff to do with that too. So it's been a crazy day. But we're going to jump into this crazy book. All right. Let's go. We are on chapter 3. This starts to dive into where'd Bridget go? They dumped her out again. There she is. Renee, I'm going to go ahead and upgrade you to co-host if you're able to accept that in case that happens again. Okay. All right. So, Bridget, are you there?
Yes, ma'am. I got turned completely off X.
Okay.
I'm back.
Okay. So this chapter kind of sets the tone for the rest of the book as far as the meshing of the savings and loan, Michener and BB. Michener obviously having CIA ties, BB having Mafia ties. So let's get started with this. Remember that we were talking about Ben Barnes yesterday and how he is kind of a person that's in the background but ties a whole bunch of people together. So he was a very smooth talker, never flustered, and he was a very close associate of Herman Beebe and Walter Michener. And when asked about whether or not they knew each other, Ben Barnes was like, I don't even know if they knew each other, which of course they did. So when the author interviewed Michener, he was saying, oh, I don't know. I don't know if I ever even met BB. And I say that because this is exactly the same thing we ran into, if you guys remember, when we were going over Gary Webb's book, how Blanton kept saying, no, I only went to Miami because I didn't have enough money, even though his wife had given him $5,000 and his wife flew directly to Los Angeles. And we know he was in Miami to set up the cocaine network that he was going to go to Los Angeles and execute. So none of these people on the first go around tell the truth about anything. So, I just see XR in there. Let me send him. Oh, okay. Hold on. I gotta drop Renee's co-host and put SR in there. All right, there we go. Okay. So the author says that when Michener called to complain about an article that he had written in the Houston Post that mentioned both him and BB, he changed his story a little bit and said, "Oh, I haven't seen him in like 15 years. Maybe one time at a bank, and it had something to do with a loan." Then the next month, in an interview in his office at Michener Corporation, Michener went on to say, "I met BB when we were still in the old Continental building before we moved. He had an insurance company. That's the only time that I ever met him." And the author goes on to say, BB must hold the record for meeting people only one time, because that's all anybody ever wanted to say. No, I only ever met him once. But the one person who saw BB almost daily was a guy by the name of Dale Anderson. He disclosed that BB had established ties with Michener and his Allied Bank way back in 1975. Anderson said that he had never met with Michener, but that Herman met with him several times. BB used Michener's Allied Bank for a number of deals, and the size of the deals would have guaranteed that Michener knew who he was. He went on to say that we borrowed money from Allied pretty often, $1 million here, $500,000 there. These loans were for working capital for their companies under the AMI umbrella and were all paid back before AMI went out of business. The only Allied loan to BB that Michener mentioned was one for $800,000 and was in connection with an Allied loan on Carol Kelly's Continental Savings stock, which BB's company guaranteed. In addition to loans, Anderson said, Allied gave BB's company a big hunk of the credit life insurance for car loans made by Allied. They had two clusters of banks, and they gave one of them to us. And it was about that time that Allied had some 40 banks across Texas. Allied meaning Michener. Anytime BB got control of a financial institution, he would require borrowers of that institution to purchase credit life insurance from his insurance company. Such insurance pays off the loan in the event of the death of the borrower. It was very lucrative business for BB. And if a potential borrower declined it, he was usually told to get a loan somewhere else. AMI also had money on deposit at Allied. We'd buy CDs there, Anderson said. And a 1976 House Finance Subcommittee report on Texas Rent-A-Bank scandal showed that BB's Louisiana insurance company, Savings Life, had very large CD deposits at Allies from the mid 70s on. In addition, the 1985 Comptroller of the Currency report on BB listed Allied Lakewood Bank, an Allied member bank in Dallas, as being controlled by BB and his associates. BB's primary contact at Allied was a man named Gerald Smith, the chief executive officer. Smith is listed in the 1985 Comptroller's report as well as part owner of First National Bank of Jefferson Parish in Louisiana, where BB Anderson and others owned $1.6 million in debentures for the bank's parent corporation and held warrants to buy 14% of the stock. As noted, Robert Clark, the former comptroller of the currency, was also involved in the bank with his brother-in-law, Kent Anderson, who was an Allied Bank officer. So the guy that's supposed to be watching over all of this is in bed with it. Clark was a shareholder in the bank with stock holdings up to $100,000 and also received at least $5,000 in legal fees from the bank. As late as 1985, Clark had an outstanding loan for $250,000 at the bank. Gerald Smith and Michener go back to at least the 1960s when Michener bought one of his first banks, Continental Bank, where Smith was working. Smith had been a former bank examiner. He became Michener's right-hand man at Allied. And as we discovered yesterday, a lot of the regulators that were supposed to be watching over this bank gets hired by this mesh of banks so they know how to skirt the system. If Michener wanted something done at Allied, he called Gerald Smith and it got done. He was oftentimes referred as Michener's gopher. Michener denies ever owning a bank in Louisiana. A former Texas bank examiner and veteran Houston business reporter confirmed that he had extensive bank holdings in Louisiana. The bank examiner said that one time in the late 1970s, he was playing poker with Michener and some of his associates in a small town in Louisiana where Michener owned a bank. Michener leaned over to him and asked him if he knew the man sitting next to him. The examiner said no. Michener grinned and said it was the governor of Louisiana, Edwin Edwards, the guy when he got out of the governor's mansion, they started paying a large sum of money to on an annual basis. $100,000 a year. When it became obvious to insiders in the early 80s that the savings and loan industry in Texas was hitting rough times, Michener ordered all savings and loan stock loans at Allied moved out of the bank. He believed, or perhaps knew, what was going to happen. One of the savings and loan stock loans at Allied Bank was to Carol Kelly at Continental Savings. It had a guarantee from Beebe. Nearby San Jacinto Savings, a Houston-based subsidiary of Southmark Corporation, gladly accepted the loan from Allied, even without the guarantee from Beebe. The head of that bank was another person with business relationships to Michener, Beebe, and Gene Phillips. Gene Phillips, this relationship was born out of the biggest personal bankruptcy in South Carolina's history. It took a real estate investment trust, a REIT, in Atlanta called Southmark and transformed it into a $9 billion company in Dallas. Helping him along the way was $1.2 billion in a financial arrangement from Michael Milken, the junk bond king. What? In the summer of 1984, when it was clear that the U.S. Attorney Joe Cage in Shreveport was going to nail Beebe, who should come to Beebe's financial rescue but Gene Phillips and Southmark? They agreed to buy Beebe's nursing homes for an incredible sum of $50 million. They consummated the deal after Beebe was indicted and convicted of defrauding the Small Business Administration. Then Phillips and his partner, William Friedman, who was the vice president of Southmark, bought Beebe's Bossier Bank and Trust for $8 million. The bank was already on the skids when they acquired it. It failed almost immediately. There was no reason to give him that amount of money because the bank was just prior to foreclosure. Now, nobody like Phillips throws away millions of dollars to a known mobster like Beebe unless he's told to do so. There's evidence to indicate that. In 1983, Southmark bought San Joaquin Savings in Houston. And while the nominal heads of the savings loan remained in place, a mob associate from Chicago, Joseph Grosz, Grosz, came in to make all of the big loan decisions. Anderson, who was Beebe's partner, said they dealt primarily with Groves in their transactions with Southmark. While Southmark, and remember, Southmark is like a REIT as well in Texas, was generously bailing Beebe out and assuming Beebe's guaranteed loans from Allied Bank, Walter Mitchner, who owns Allied Bank, and Gene Phillips were investors together in a development program called Oak Cliff Stallion. There were 10 partners in this syndicate, each with 1/20th interest in 13 thoroughbred colts, including big name sires like Secretariat. With the exception of Phillips, most of the partners were from Houston. The financing bank, according to the statements on file in Miami, was Allied Bank, Mitchner. Continental Savings wasn't the only savings and loan whose stock was financed by Allied Bank. Raymond Hill, a Houston attorney and owner of Mainland Savings, also had his mainland stock financed at Allied. Now, what's weird about this is if you're going to buy stock, why are you financing it? Why would you loan somebody money to buy a stock? Hill went to Continental Savings, Carol Kelly, who sent him to Beebe. And according to Beebe's partner, Dale Anderson, one day Beebe called Anderson to tell him that they were going to Houston to talk to Raymond Hill. We stopped in New Orleans first. Hill was a scared weakling, according to Anderson. You could smell it. We said we'd give him $1 million tomorrow, but we wanted a piece of the action. He didn't want to do it. Although that particular deal didn't go through, there were other connections between Beebe and Mainland. In 1985, the U.S. Comptroller of the Currency report on Beebe named Mainland as one of the many savings and loans controlled by Beebe. Raymond Hill appeared to be an odd match for Mitchner and Beebe. Hill was a fifth-generation Texan born into a prominent, wealthy family. His mother, a Vanden Burge from Victoria, Texas, and his father, an attorney and CEO of Houston Oil Company. His brother, George Jr., was also a well-known attorney in the local area. Hill's father and brother had both passed away. Hill had went to Hotchkiss Prep School and served briefly in World War II, came back to Houston, graduated from the University of Houston, and then from the university's law school. The story is told how Hill's mother called up a senior partner of Vincent and Elkins, a very well-respected law firm in the area, and said, "Hey, you need to hire my son." And he got a job. Hill got into the savings and loan business in the 1960s when he was riding in an airplane with a good friend, William Shepard, who told him that two of them should buy a savings and loan. Hill and Shepard purchased Mainland Savings in Texas City. At the time, it only had $2 million on deposit. It was a small blue-collar bank located just outside of Houston. Hill's friend and partner, Shepard, is a major character in Jonathan Kitney's groundbreaking book, The Fountain Pen Conspiracy, that was written in 1973. I have that book. It's an interesting book. In 1969 and 1970, Shepard took some $1.3 million from several financial institutions in exchange for worthless checks drawn on a bank of Sark, S-A-R-K, which happened to be a shell bank in the British Isle of Shark, which is located in the Channel Islands, right off the coast of Isle of Jersey. Now, if you guys remember, the Isle of Jersey is one of the favorite CIA money laundering places for drug money. In 1973, Shepard was convicted for this scam and sentenced to 15 years in jail. His name also surfaced in the Sharptown scandal of the 1970s, which was a stock fraud investigation. Shepard was giving rides in his Learjet to politicians, including one of Michener's favorite buddies, then Governor Preston Smith. In 1975, Hill decided to move his little savings and loan up to the big time. He bought a huge Spanish Mediterranean style building with a clock tower in the area that was purchased from none other than Walter Michener. It was not known then, but Hill and Michener had met each other on more than one occasion. Hill thought Walter was his mentor. One of the CEOs said, Hill and Michener have both separately attempted to downplay their relationship, as Michener did with everybody. Maybe just met him once or twice. And when people would say something about it, the excuse that they gave on why they couldn't possibly have been friends is Mr. Michener's so much older than him. He wouldn't hang out with him. He hung out with him quite a bit. Michener was actually only 3 years older than Hill, and the purchase of the Allen Parkway building in 1975 was basically done with Allied Bank. So Hill's mainland stock was also financed by Allied Bank. So they had a lot of business relationships for supposedly not really knowing each other. One of the people involved, a guy by the name of Art Leiser, Leiser, said that Hill had an interesting way of dealing with mainland's stock dividends. Hill would not pay out all the dividends in cash. He would instead reinvest them in additional stock and then brag about how he was building up mainland's capital that way. What Leister found out later was that Hill would take his additional stock and use it as collateral for more loans at Allied Bank. So he was basically using dividends, which should have been paid out to the customers, to put deposits on banks, but then he was going to Allied Bank drawing out loans based on that collateral. So it kind of zeroed itself out, except he got to use the money in the meantime. And they didn't care because the banks are going to fail anyway. After Hill moved his stock loan out of Allied, he financed it at several different Houston banks. According to a former mainland CEO, Ron Bearden, these included Suburban Bank, South Main Bank, North Shore Bank, and River Oaks Bank and Trust. What's interesting about River Oaks Bank and Trust is it was controlled by President Bush and Michener's friend, Jimmy Lyons. Who's Jimmy Lyons? Well, Jimmy Lyons just happens to be one of the big fundraisers for Iran-Contra. In June 1984, Mainland paid out almost $20 million to Allied in a deal that showed Hill's friendship with Meisner, but caused the savings and loan to lose $14 million that basically was passed on to us when the bank failed. And this is how it happened. In 1982, Allied lent $27 million to an oil and gas company called Penaco, Penaco. It was controlled by Al Pena. It was secured by 30 oil and gas leases in 18 counties in Texas. The following year, Penaco filed for bankruptcy, and by 1984 was in default of all of the Allied loans, still owing $21 million. Allied had already posted the security property for foreclosure when Mainland stepped in and bought the loans for $19.2 million. Pena testified in a bankruptcy hearing that no other lender could be found to take over the Allied loans and that the transaction with Mainland was a last resort. It was almost unheard of for a medium sized savings and loan like Mainland to buy a big oil and gas loan by itself, much less buy one for 90 cents on the dollar. It just was not done. Also at that time, oil drilling was in the was in the tank. Prices were way down. There's no way it was worth that amount of money. So basically, the net result of that was Mainland just handing over $20 million. So Mainland lost $14 million on the deal. And it didn't make any sense unless you look at the relationship between Hill and Michener. But there was more to Mainland savings than the relationships between Michener and Beebe. Mainland was one of the first failed thrifts that Houston Post investigated, to include this author. In the spring of 1987, two Houston reporters, the author and Gregory Say, were interviewing Raymond Hill at Mainland Savings. It had failed in 1986, the year before. It was the biggest savings and loan failure in the country. It supposedly had $1 billion in assets that didn't exist. No one paid much attention to Mainland's failure at the time. Talk of a possible taxpayer bailout of the industry was more than 2 years away, while the press release from the federal agency explaining its takeover of Mainland was wild. Here's a quote. Mainland's insolvency resulted from rapid growth in its asset base from approximately 308 million to over $1 billion between 83 and 85. The increase reflected the association's aggressive program of high-risk, poorly underwritten land and construction lending, funded through brokered deposits and in-house sales of high-cost jumbo CDs. Although that's at the end of the quote. The explanation was like saying someone died of malnutrition from overeating. What loans? What deposits? There was no money. It was all fake. By the beginning of 1987, it was becoming apparent that something bigger was happening, and there wasn't just a few savings and loans that it was occurring with. One of the business writers, Say, for the Houston Post, wrote a story about fraud-riddled daisy chain Texas savings and loan that had been swapping bad loans among themselves and selling each other loan participations. Say quoted the U.S. Attorney in Houston, who named Mainland Savings as one of the participants. The story prompted an anonymous call to the reporter, telling him to investigate transactions between Mainland Savings and a man by the name of Howard Pulver. That call sent Say and the author on a 2-year journey into the real estate transactions of mind-boggling complexity, rabbit holes that disappeared into offshore bank accounts, trips to Long Island, San Diego, Kansas City, all the Mafia headquarters, slippery politicians. Ultimately, the quest led to the Houston's business establishment, which, when examined in depth, intersected with both the Mafia and the CIA. After receiving that anonymous call, he began researching deals between Howard Pulver and Mainland and quickly found himself drowning in a sea of records. Hundreds of corporations, partnerships, and transactions covering thousands and thousands of pages of documents were on file and had deed records at Harris County. After Say reported to his editors the problem he was encountering because of the size of the matrix that he had stumbled across, one of the assistant editors asked the author to help him sort through it. It took them several months to analyze all of the documents. It seemed that Pulver and his 3 partners, who were apartment syndicators from New York City, had come to Houston in the mid-70s and bought 35 aging apartment complexes. They loaded these buildings up with huge mortgage debt and then immediately flipped the properties by selling them to limited partnerships that they themselves owned. Then, in late 1984 and 85, they sold all of the promissory notes, securing the enormous mortgage debts to mainland savings. This, folks, is what you call money laundering. This transaction passed all of the risk from the real estate operators to the savings and loan. It enabled the speculators to cash in their paper profits. There were 56 of these notes with a total face value of $333 million. At the time of the sale of the promissory notes to mainland, the apartment complexes were worth $192 million. So they were completely upside down. The question was, how much did mainland pay for the promissory notes? How much did it and ultimately the taxpayers lose on this purchase when mainland savings went bust? The reporters went to see Raymond Hill for answers. The interview was intended to be a friendly information gathering, fact finding one. We believe that Hill had every intention of helping us understand what happened to mainland savings. In the interview, he started off very friendly, smiling. However, instead of taking questions from us, he started rambling with a speech about mainland savings and why it failed. It was the similar story about how everyone had the best intentions. He went on to say, the inflation of the late 1970s put the squeeze on savings and loans by raising the cost, i.e., interest rate, they paid for deposits compared to lower interest rates they were receiving on home mortgages. Congress and the Reagan administration tried to solve the industry's problems by removing the cap on interest rates they could pay for deposits and loosening up the restrictions on the type of property they could invest in and make loans on. But then, according to Hill, the problem in the industry arose when the economy turned down and the government regulators began criticizing all of the loans and investments they'd made. Hill's condescending, holier than thou attitude was too much. At one point, he bragged about his prophecy about the plight of the savings and loan industry had come true. I've been giving the curse of a certain amount of foresight. When the two reporters began asking him some very pointed questions about the purchase of Pulver's notes and the value of the underlying collateral, he got mad. You're asking me to remember the details of actions that I didn't personally handle? He then tried to hide Mainland's accounting firm. Then he hid behind the accounting firm, saying, in every case, we consulted with Coopers and Librand. Then he claimed that he had only met with Pulver on one occasion. But they were doing $300 million worth of transactions. Anybody believe that? He then claimed that he had maintained that he was merely a caretaker owner and didn't even serve on the loan committee, which was contrary to all of the documentation that had already been filed in the lawsuit. Finally, after they kept asking him the question, Hill told the other reporter, "You're a bastard." This came from a man wearing his religion on his sleeve who taught Sunday school classes at St. John's the Divine Episcopal Church, the richest enclave church in all of Houston. He said that he had not been subpoenaed to appear before any grand jury investigating Mainland's failure. He went on to say, I can tell you that I don't expect to be subpoenaed. Finally, when asked about the rumors of the presence of organized crime at Mainland, he accused them of stumbling in the same direction as the FBI. What gave Raymond Hill the idea that he was never going to get subpoenaed about these deals? Who was he really working for? Searching for the answers to those questions led to a discovery of Hill and Mainland's relationship to Mafia, CIA, Iran-Contra, Herman Beebe, Walter Mitchner, Senator Orrin Hatch of Utah, James Baker III, who had been the former Secretary of Treasury and the former Secretary of State, and was also George Bush's close friend and now White House Chief of Staff. So that's crazy. We're going to stop there for today because this stuff has to be taken in small pieces to digest all of this stuff. The next chapter is actually a really long chapter. It'll probably take us 2 days to get through it, but it's the one that kind of ties the CIA into this. And if you guys remember, I did want to point out, if you guys don't know what brokered loans are, basically what you're going to find out in this book, because I'd never heard of them, so I'm just going to pass on my knowledge of it. These savings and loans over a certain amount based on which savings and loan it is. Let's just say, for argument's sake, it's $1 million. Loans over $1 million have to be approved by the board of directors. There was part of the new law that was implemented at the beginning of the Reagan administration allowed a person to make a deposit. So if I'm the CIA and I deposit $1 million in your bank, not the board of directors, I, the depositor, gets to dictate who gets to borrow that money. It's called brokered loans. So what they're doing is they are using a vehicle called the savings and loan to deposit money into and then loan that money out to nefarious people. But the risk doesn't go to the person that made that deposit because of fractional lending, they can make that deposit worth a whole lot more than just the $1 million. So, depending on what the ratio is, 9-to-1, 10-to-1, whatever, that $1 million became $10 million. And in loaning out that $10 million, they only risk losing $1 million, but now the $10 million is in the pocket of the people they want it to go to. That's a brokered loan. And that's crazy because anybody that knows anything about the way the CIA works knows that that's going to be a magnet for them to use these savings and loans as a money laundering opportunity. So that's what it's all about. Go ahead, SR.
Thank you, Colonel, and thank everyone for attending on Rumble and here on X. And for those that were having issues with sound on X, hopefully they found their way to Rumble. There's a few things here that just blew my mind when I started looking at the failures of the savings and loans. Out of there were 3,234 savings and loans and 1,043 of those failed. That's almost a third of all our S&Ls.
Yep.
The total cost to taxpayers was $132 billion. Texas failures, the 1988 peak, accounted for greater than 40% of the failures. Mainland assets at seizure was approximately $1 billion.
Yep.
And mainland cost to the SLIC was $500 to $7 million, and that's an estimate.
Yes.
Now, the other thing I would say is Orrin Hatch. If anybody knows anything about Orrin Hatch, Orrin Hatch managed to stay in politics by flipping parties. And I was not a fan of Orrin Hatch. I can tell you that to begin with.
Yep. Yeah. So it was a big deal. But prior to reading this book, I had never put the savings and loan crisis in the same bed with the Contras or the CIA or even the Mafia. I had no idea they were all connected. So basically, in a nutshell, they were money laundering through the savings and loans, and it was a controlled demolition. And you can see the beauty of it if you look at who's members of the international syndicate is big bankers. They didn't like the fact that people banked at local savings and loans because they didn't control them. And by collapsing the savings and loan, a lot of people were the only branches left in their towns were big bank branches. So from our perspective, our little skeleton, everybody in our skeleton benefited. The CIA benefited, the Mafia benefited, the nefarious Contra, death squads, money laundering for weapons and drugs, they all benefited. The big banks benefited. The only people that got screwed was us. Both the people that had money on account in the savings and loan, because a lot of them did not get all of their money back, and us in the taxpayer realm, that our taxes was used to bail a whole bunch of these out. But when you do the bailout, as we all know, there's a priority as to who gets paid back first. And very rarely is it us. So, yeah, it's crazy. I don't know what's going on with X. I did check before we started to see if there was an update, and there isn't. But yeah, lots of problems in the last few days with X.
One interesting side note, I stumbled on the video of Ted Cruz talking about, the children's saving accounts that were going to be set up by the government, blah, blah, blah. And they are going to be invested in savings and loans. So just kind of an interesting, I would love to hear what Stellar, I may have to message her and ask her what she thinks about that. Because of the history of savings and loans and about, there's something here that we're missing that there's a connection,
I don't want the federal government in that business.
Oh, I totally agree.
It's completely unconstitutional. Period.
I totally agree. And that's why it just struck me as odd. Okay. But I don't know.
Yeah. I'm sick of all of this, actually. The more we say that we want our republic back, they keep throwing out these bullshit things that just further destroys. Who thinks that the federal government is going to invest our money and then 10 years from now is not going to take that money just like they did with the Social Security? Who in their right mind actually believes that? Because if you actually believe that, I can sell you some swampland.
Right. Beachfront property in Arizona, but yeah, and that's why there's got to be some angle. But maybe it's just rinse, wash, repeat. The same people involved.
I don't want the federal government involved in it, and I don't care if Trump's in office or not.
I agree.
All right, Renee, go ahead.
Hey there. Yeah, this is just like another notch in the ways of pulling crap over us, and I want a refund because I'm not good in comprehending all this banking stuff. But it's like as we learn and peel back the layers of the onion, it's just like how many ways do they launder through and take advantage of us? I mean, we got churches, we got NGOs, we got foundations, we got the federal system, we got the Mafia, CIA system. It's like, I mean, is there any virtuous system left? I don't think so. It's overwhelming, but I want a refund. That's all I got to say.
Yeah, I want a refund too. SR, go ahead.
Thank you, Colonel. I'm sitting here just thinking about this for a minute, because when you can broker your own loans, to me, it's a wonder all of them didn't fail. You can
Well,
broker your own loans.
well, hold on.
Okay, we're good here.
But you have to actually control the board, because the board has to allow the deposit for and approve the brokered deposit. So they're not going to go outside of their sphere of influence, which is why it's so important to understand how many banks BB and Michener touched, because all of the banks that they touched was involved in this. So you have to have a corrupt guy at the top. He has to buy a whole bunch of the banks, and they have to appoint all of their people onto the boards. Now, that's not to say that they have that same control over all of the industry, but they had enough, obviously, based on the numbers you just gave us, they had enough people to scatter out, to take over a third of the banks, do this operation, and then implode those banks after they stole all the money. Yeah, I was kind of taken aback on the research I did outside of this book on how this whole thing went down, because what you're going to find, and he goes into a couple of examples in a couple of future chapters about, here's the bank like Mainland, and here's like the board of directors of that bank at the time, and then you start going down the list, kind of like we do on our research projects, and you see this one's tied to this guy. Oh, and he also sits on the board of this other savings and loan over here, and he got a loan. He sits on Mainland, but he got a loan from this other board, and his son's married to that guy's daughter. And so they just kind of start going down through all of the different relationships. And I was reading an article, it wasn't from either one of these two reporters, that just kind of showed the overlap between all of these savings and loans, and how they were basically, there may have been 5 savings and loan and 20 people. And of the 20 people, they were either sitting on the other board that they got a loan from the other bank, or they had relatives that were getting loans from them sitting on the board. So it was just like a massive money laundering operation. Renee, go ahead.
It's like how to start a racket 101. All right, we got a lot of extra dough, and we got to start a bank, and we got to launder that money and buy some property, and we can launder through there. It's how to start a racket. I mean, listening to this chapter, it's like, dang, it sounds easy to start a bank. Maybe we should all start a bank. It's kind of great.
It is. And then, as you can see, they were making loans double what the property was worth. And then, of course, when the bank fails, they're not going to get that. And a lot of the loans, as we'll find out, weren't collateralized properly. And so a lot of them didn't have to pay the loans back. It literally is that. And when you understand their ties to the Mafia and the CIA, it all makes perfect sense now. SR, go ahead.
Thank you, Colonel. For those that don't follow at War Hamster, I highly recommend you do. He is into and has been a part of the financial system practically his entire life. I'm sure he's got a lot of stories to tell about this savings and loan debacle, but I'd also like to know what he has to say about the current health of savings and loans today. That would be something to find out.
Yeah.
Thank you, Carl.
Hopefully he'll be, I mean, he's read this book too. Hopefully he'll be joining us in the next couple of days. He just got out of surgery and just got released from the hospital. So please keep him in your prayers. Yeah, I agree. As we refer to him in our internal circle, he's a reformed Wall Street banker. That's how we refer to him as. And yes, he is very, very, very smart when it comes to this type of thing. So yeah, I highly recommend you guys follow him if you haven't been. Um, so we've got a lot to talk about tonight on Apple Warrior Show. We're going to go into the history of the CIA's hand in the refugee program, since that's all the hottest uh, discussions right now. And I did a little bit of digging. I found an organization that basically is the skeleton in the closet of how all of this operation works. And I'm going to go into the background of the entity and how it kind of spawned all of the hundreds of refugee entities that are in existence today. And once you understand what the backbone is, you will understand the level of nefariousness involved and how they all got started. Um, Obviously, we know that there's a lot of church affiliation. We've went through that before. The one that stands out the most is not current day, but in the history was the Catholic Charities, where they were involved in the resettlement of northern Vietnam, people using CIA psyops propaganda to forcibly relocate them into the South to prop up the Catholic soon to be president Diem as a quote unquote legitimate alternative to Ho Chi Minh. And we also saw them in Operation Peter Pan, where they went into Cuba and basically told everybody, which was not true, that Castro was going to steal all of their children, because of course the island was primarily Catholic, and they went to Catholic schools. And so every day they would petrify the children and the parents, telling them that Castro was going to steal their kids and send them to Siberia. And then the CIA, using the Catholic Church, basically created Operation Peter Pan to smuggle these children. And they did it in Haiti as well. That's how they ended up kidnapping them kids. They smuggle them off the island of Cuba into the United States. And some of them went to orphanages, some of them went to adoption, some of them went to family members. There were a lot of kids that never saw their parents again. Some had happy endings, some did not. Some committed suicide because they missed their family back in Cuba. But the thought of, as Renee mentioned earlier, of a religious organization participating in an intelligence program to destabilize a country is mind-boggling to me. But it just keeps coming up. Today, it's all religions. That Hebrew one was taking hundreds of millions of dollars from the Biden administration to traffic everybody, kids, young adults, grown-ups into the United States. Catholic Charities was involved. Every church, the Lutheran Church, the Mormon Church, they were all making money off of human trafficking. And that's crazy to even say that out loud. It sounds like some crazy conspiracy theory, and we just all lived through it. So I think that having the foundation that we've provided here, when you listen to some of the things that are happening now, there are some people that when you talk to them about some of that, they're like, I just don't believe that. Well, if they knew the history, they would believe it, because it's not an isolated incident. Bridget, go ahead.
And just to your point, just yesterday, I think, or day before, they released, the Department of Justice a grand jury convicted a missionary of not just sex crimes, but sex trafficking of children. And they were sex crimes against a child. And out of Haiti. And I'm like, boy, could have called that one, you know? We see it over and over and over again. And it gets to the point where you just don't trust anything.
No.
And going into anything with extreme skeptical is always a good thing anymore.
But I mean, even the extreme skeptical, I think I was a skeptic, but this just is so far crazy. So now, every time you hear like that one several months ago of the missionaries being killed in Haiti, you're like, okay, well, what were they doing? And
exactly.
the normal response of most Americans who don't understand history is like, oh my gosh, Haiti is such a horrible place. They're killing missionaries. Well, you happen to not know what some of the atrocities missionaries have created. And a lot of the missionaries aren't actually missionaries. They're embedded intelligence and assassins doing all kinds of nefarious shit. And they're not actual missionaries at all. They just use that apparatus to do whatever the hell they want.
Absolutely.
And if you don't know that, you can see how easy it is to punk us.
Right. And feed us a narrative over and over and over again. And it is hard to break through the brainwashing.
Yep.
Because it is a knee-jerk reaction of, oh no, they're killing Christians. No, they may not. They may go under the guise of Christians. They may come in the cloak of Christianity. But what were they actually doing?
Well, that's just like Pelosi telling us that she's a Catholic and supporting abortion. What? Anyway, Renee, go ahead.
Yeah, to follow up with what you ladies are talking about, I finally started hacking into Thy Will Be Done. And the first handful of chapters are just about that very thing of the missionaries. And it even connects, with petroleum and in the guise of religion and saving the world. They send in geologists and linguists and missionaries, and they even start before they go to China, before they, in the book, they go to Latin America. It talks about doing it with the Baptist Church and the Native American Indians in the U.S.
Yes.
And then you have a petroleum guy in California who invests in the guy Schofield, who writes the Schofield Bible. I mean, it's all up in there. When I didn't realize going into this book, it was going to be so much religious stuff at first. And then now I'm finally getting into South America and stuff. But yeah, it's all up in there with the missionaries and the Summer Institute of Linguistics, which is based in North Carolina, still exists today. And it's fascinating stuff. But
it is. It's a tough read. It was one of the hardest books for me to get through, just because of it's not written in a spellbinding way like the Underground Empire about syntax. It's 1,000 pages. It's longer than Thy Will Be Done. Thy Will Be Done is a very long book. It's a big book. But the Underground Empire is written very well. So I could not put that book down. I had to make myself read Thy Will Be Done just because the way in which it's written. I've learned a lot about literary styles from having read so many books so close together, that some books are compelling. You just can't put them down. This Mafia CIA George Bush book was one of them. The only thing with this one is the author does a very good job of reminding you who the people are, because there's so many people. When he gets to the next chapter, he always puts in parentheses, this is the guy that was his right-hand man or whatever. So it's a little easier to follow. But there's so much information in Thy Will Be Done. It's like I could read a chapter at a time, and then I would go and read 2 other books and come back to it, because it's so heavy, especially diffusing. And I know Patriot Sarah's here. I love her to death. Her and I DM'd a lot when I was reading Thy Will Be Done, because of her experience and connectivity to some of the organizations that was mentioned. And it's hard. It's hard to accept the fact, but that's why I think the way in which we've rolled this out, when we started with the Protestant missionaries in Hawaii and how they was using church money to buy the sugar plantations in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and then overthrow the country and depose the queen out there, just so that they could continue making money. And the fact that they, like 70% of the island was Chinese laborers. I had no idea any of that stuff was true. Again, because we're not taught real history. So all very, very interesting. I see they kicked Bridget out again. They must not like. Go ahead, Patriot Sarah.
My parents went through the SIL training, and they were part of Wycliffe Bible translators.
Yeah. So it's definitely personal.
Yes, personal. I'm sorry, it still breaks my heart.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's Sarah went through the same thing that I did when I discovered how nefarious so many of our senior leaders are in the military, and how they served as officers in the Nugent Hand Bank. And these are 4-star generals that are dealing in money laundering. It destroys you on the inside, because a lot of the people were still on active duty when I came into the military, and I recognized their names. And the same thing we were just talking about last night when I did that show with the guy in Canada. And when we were talking about the Strategic Air Command, and finding out yesterday about how all of the generals, and again, I worked at a SAC base. I had been, I didn't know personally any of the generals, but they were like the icons of the military in the 1970s. These are people that we basically were taught not to worship, but highly respect for their pushing the envelope on new innovations in the Air Force. They were like the icons of the senior military in thought, and how they're what's the word? They're put up on a pedestal as people to emulate, as far as pushing the envelope and innovation and stuff like that. I had no idea that they wanted to basically deploy tactical nuclear weapons on everything that we did, whether it was Vietnam or in Egypt or whatever. It's like everything, nuke it. And when you start reading things that are not in Air University's library, you find out there's a completely different world understanding of these people that we were all shielded from. It's crazy. But I think it's fundamental to our understanding, because obviously it relates to today. Let me give you guys an example. I had to make a phone call. I have one of those, I have an entire network of people that are still on active duty. And I had to check myself. I'm like, what about this story? It doesn't make any sense. And let me explain to you. So I'm going to do it the best I can. In the military, I've explained to you guys that we have what's referred to as combatant commanders. We have 2 kinds of COCOMs. They call them COCOMs. They're combatant commanders. One set of them are geographically aligned. So CENTCOM has the Middle East, PACOM has the Pacific, EUCOM has European, AFRICOM has Africa, blah, blah, blah. SOUTHCOM has the Caribbean and below. We also have a different kind of COCOMs that are functional based. So you have cybercom now, you have strategic, you have space, you have, and that obviously branched off into kind of a separate service, but still under the Air Force. It's a really weird situation. But SOCOM, Special Operations Command, which is co-located with CENTCOM at MacDill Air Force Base, is what we refer to as an OTE command. So every service, whether it's Air Force, Navy, Marines, Army, has people in it that are designated special forces or special operations. SOCOM sole job is organize, train, and equip for special operations. So if you're the chief of staff of the Air Force, I'm going to give you an analogy. If you're the chief of staff of the Air Force, you're an OT&E guy. You organize, train, and equip Air Force personnel to go fight for one of the COCOMs. So if I'm sitting at Shaw Air Force Base and I'm an F-16 pilot, my service is Air Force. The chief of staff of the Air Force trains me how to fight in my F-16. But I don't fight for the chief of staff of the Air Force because he doesn't fight wars. I deploy to one of the COCOMs, CENTCOM, to go fly missions. I take my airplane, I go to Saudi Arabia, wherever, in the Middle East. I fight, and then I return home. So I have an administrative command in the Air Force, and I have an operational command through CENTCOM. When I'm deployed, I report through CENTCOM. I fly missions for the CENTCOM commander. I come back home, and I'm under the administrative command of the Air Force. SOCOM is very unique in that we have Air Force Special Operations Command at Hurlburt Field in the Panhandle of Florida. They have helicopters and C-130s that have special operations equipment on them. The Air Force does not pay for those Special Operation Command doodads that are put on our helicopters and the C-130s. We supply a regular C-130 to AVSOC, that's the name of the command, at Hurlburt Field. It is SOCOM's job to lobby Congress to get money. They are given their own special line item in a budget that equips all of our C-130s and helicopters to fly Special Operation Command missions. So CENTCOM has a subordinate command called SOC-CENT, Special Operations Command Central Command. So when I'm a warfighter in the Middle East, I organize my fighters, whether it's fighter aircraft, C-130s to move supplies around in the theater. I do all of that stuff. I send a forces request to the Air Force to give me all my air assets. Some of those air assets are going to be AVSOC special equipped 130s and helicopters. When they deploy forward, they're under the command of those theater, they call them theater SOCs, Special Operations Command, and they report to CENTCOM. What you're finding out with this latest hoax is the name of SOCOM's commander keeps coming up. I just explained to you that SOCOM does not fight wars. They provide specialized equipment, organize, train, and equip capability to the theater SOCs. So SOUTHCOM has what's called SOC South. So if I go to any mission in the Caribbean or South America and I'm going to do an operation, Southcom, the guy who just quit and retired, has the war plan to whatever the president and the SecDef tells them to do. They create a war plan to go do that. If they need Special Operations Command capability, they get it from their theater SOC. And they just talk to Southcom and say, hey, I need this, this, and this, or whatever. SOCOM does not run operations. And yet his name keeps coming up in all of these. He's the one that gave the command for the double tap or whatever, which it isn't. It's just taking out an enemy. That whole line of thought is bullshit. You are told to destroy it. What most people don't understand, if you look at those containers that are on those fast boats, they're either wrapped in tarps or they're in plastic sealed barrels. What happens is there are occasions when those boats are disabled in the water. If they see Coast Guard coming to board them, they take all of that contraband and throw it overboard. There's finders. They have tracking devices on those packages, which is why they're sealed, so that they can come back and get it. So the order to destroy those boats destroys the contraband and what they're now referring to as terrorists that are taking that contraband to its stop, wherever that happens to be. So taking out the entire package, both people and contraband, is the mission. You cannot, because they have sophisticated equipment and we've already discovered and it's been around for decades. They have the ability to tap into our systems and know when Coast Guard is coming. They have the ability to the same satellite capability that we're talking about, because the military in Colombia and these South American countries are tapped into our systems because they're supposed to be partners with us in stopping the trafficking. We know they're not, and that they're using it to thwart the stopping of the trafficking. So the only logical thing is to destroy it completely. You're not going to board it because they know you're coming. So I wanted to, so I had to call my friend yesterday, and I'm like, he happens to be somebody that embeds with Army Special Operations Command as an Air Force officer. And I'm like, I need you to check me. Has the chain of command somehow changed since I retired? Why is everybody talking about the SOCOM commander when he's not an operational commander? He's not. He trains and equips special operations. So I just find all of the information out there to be not consistent with the way operations actually happen. Southcom is in charge of that AOR. He has a theater SOC to run special operations for him. Now, I will add this just so that you guys know. There are special units that fall outside of a theater COCOM that can be tasked directly from the White House to the SecDef to a assistant secretary at the Pentagon. And the acronym used to be SOLIC, Special Operations LIC. And that entity normally, now that we can talk about JSOC because it's already been written about, they can be tasked directly from the president and SecDef to go operate in a theater. And the reason why I explained the difference between administrative command and operational command is this. The JSOC commander normally is a 2-star guy. He administratively reports directly to SOCOM. He's at Fort Bragg. But when he does operational things, he is under basically the SecDef directly. So if they're going to run a special operation in an ongoing theater, and let's just take, for example, the Caribbean, they can tell the theater SOC and the Southcom commander, we're going to be operating in this area. And they basically block out that area, and they can do a mission in that area that Southcom doesn't even know exists. Southcom's not going to be involved in the planning of it or the execution of it. And while that operation is ongoing, Southcom's forces will not go into that area that has been designated a special. But when that happens, his operational commander is in the Pentagon, not SOCOM either. He just administratively reports to SOCOM for his professional evaluation or money or whatever. But operationally, when they go on a mission, it is not under the command of SOCOM. So I just find it very interesting that there's a lot of narratives out there that in reality does not function that way inside of the military. And I don't really see anybody talking about it. It's kind of weird to me. And I listen to some of these people that supposedly know a whole bunch about this, and no one's talking about that at all. So I find it all weird. And I've debated about actually just making a post and asking someone to please explain this to me, because it is not the way any of these operations are actually done. So it's really weird. Really, really weird. But I want you guys to have what the real deal is so that you're informed. So I know SR's been in the military, but Renee, did what I just explained make sense to you? Do you have any questions about that?
It's a little complicated. There's a lot of information for me to digest. My dad was in the Air Force and my brother in the Marines. So I know a little, but there's still so much lingo for me to comprehend. But yeah, it does help. And I just would like to share that. I haven't ever shared with you all, but when you speak of the equipment and knowing and satellites, after my dad was out of the Air Force, he worked for a company, and my parents met in the 60s at this company that built satellites.
Cool.
So another day, or maybe someday when we're all by a campfire sharing how we have our rice bowls peed in, I can share you all that story.
Yeah. Fair enough. SR, go ahead.
Thank you, Colonel. I just want to say, after that long explanation about what the Colonel just said, if you stop and think for 1 minute, we've got congressional critters that should know this stuff. And who are they calling? We have other people in the Defense Department that understands what's going on that are not speaking up. Okay? So when the Colonel says, yeah, they're calling the wrong guy, why are they calling the wrong guy? That's the question.
Yep. Good point. I guess let me say this. If you guys work for, let's just say Lockheed has subcontractors, right? So let's say Lockheed is making aircraft A, and you work for Lockheed. They pay your paycheck. Your evaluation is done by your boss at Lockheed. But let's say Lockheed has this project they want you to work for temporarily at McDonnell Douglas. They're going to collaborate on a system. So if you were to be loaned to McDonnell Douglas for 6 months, you have a boss that you work for at McDonnell Douglas on this joint program. And you day to day take direction from that guy. That's the operational command that I'm talking about. Your administrative command is back at Lockheed. They're still paying your paycheck. Lockheed's job is to train you to be, an electronics person. And if they want to loan you out to another company to work on a joint project, then they're still paying your paycheck. They're still writing your evaluation. But your boss at Lockheed is not telling you what to do on a day-to-day basis. Your operational commander at this joint project is. That's the same scenario that I just explained to you. So you can be at any Air Force base in the Air Force. When you get deployed to the operational commander, that becomes for that period of time. He's not going to write an evaluation on you. He's not paying you. That's still your Air Force boss back at your home station. You are going to deploy and work for your deployed commander, which is a joint program, and you're going to do exactly what he says. And then when you're done with your deployment, you go back home. That's the difference between an operational command and an administrative command. SOCOM is an administrative command for all things special operations. They organize, train, and equip every special operator in the administrative military, the Air Force, the Army, the Marines, and the Navy. And when they deploy, SOCOM commander does not command operations. He just simply makes sure that all of the special forces people are trained to the same standard on the same equipment for the theater SOCs, the special operations command commanders that are subordinate to the warfighting commander like SOCOM or CENTCOM. That's kind of the, hopefully that analogy makes sense. Why are you so mad? Go ahead.
I have been this last couple of times. I have not been able to hear a lot of what you were saying, but what you have talked about. My father was in the Strategic Air Command in the Air Force back in the day. I'm not going to say, probably around the same time that you were into, or probably a little earlier because you're kind of young.
Thank you.
And some of the things that he had said, because he went from the Air Force into Lockheed Martin, where his friend was the VP of Lockheed Martin at the time. And I'm just going to say, I think the reason why things are the way they are right now, as far as skipping chains of command and links and keeping people in the loop, is because, as you pointed out, there are a lot of brass that have been dirty. There's been a lot of people in the military that's been really corrupt, and a lot of good people underneath them have not been able to get anything done, or they were eliminated, or just kicked out of the military for one reason or another. So I think that it's not going to be the normal way of doing things right now until everything kind of gets cleared out.
I don't disagree with that. If you listen to the rhetoric that they've now, so there's a phased in approach that's happening with the seditious six, as everybody calls them. We went from, hey, we're just reminding you not to obey an illegal order, even though there hadn't been any illegal orders, to, oh my God, there's an illegal order, to now the follow-on phase is that our country is going to get destroyed by Trump, and only the military is going to be able to save it. There's been several Democrat congressional members that are now up to step 3 of this orchestrated coup. And that implies to me, based on what we know about how the CIA organizes these coups, like in the case of um, Chile, where they assassinated the one general that wouldn't go along and got a couple of other generals out of the way in order for Pinochet to move up and be that general that's going to lead the revolt against Salvador Allende, which he did. And then he installed himself as the dictator and murdered a whole bunch of people. Now, I'm not saying that's what's going to happen here because I don't believe it is, but I do believe that that's their plan. There, to your point, there are generals that have embedded themselves in, and McCaffrey's one of the ones you've seen me posting about him. He obviously spent a lot of years in the United States military. And as I pointed out, he was the Southcom commander. He was the guy for years that was responsible for interdicting drugs. He didn't interdict drugs, they doubled. Then he's moved on to be Clinton's drug czar. Okay, the Clinton that was governor where Mena, Arkansas was being used as a weapons and cocaine hub, appoints McCaffrey as his drug czar. And if you take the combination of his years at Southcom, which was quickly followed by his drug czar duties, and you look at a cocaine coming into the United States, it more than doubled under his quote unquote authority. So he obviously sucked at his job, or he was really, really good at his job and facilitated the doubling of cocaine into the United States. So that's his big claim to fame in the drug arena. And he's the one out there demanding Hegseth resign. Well, are you on the drug cartel's payroll, General? Because why else would you be demanding the one and only SecDef that has literally been given the authority to interdict actual drugs? So, SR, go ahead.
Thank you, Colonel. I agree with everything you just said, but I'll add something else to the mix here. When I see what's going on in the second phase that we're in, what it signifies to me is they have lost control of the military, and they are trying like hell to get it back. When you lose control of the military, you don't have the military backing you anymore, a lot of things stop. Thank you, Colonel.
But I do believe that there are some nefarious people still buried in our military.
Oh, absolutely, Colonel. They're going to get weeded out.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So if we've covered that, we'll probably talk a little bit about that on Alpha's show tonight before we get into our subject. But you definitely are going to want to tune in for that, because we're going to go into the foundation of the refugee program, which is another hot topic, given the execution of our guardsmen and the shooting of the other one in Washington, D.C. Where did the refugee program start from? What? And now, of course, we've got a million NGOs all making bank off of it. But there is a common denominator, and we're going to talk about it tonight. We're going to reveal where it came from and who was behind it. And I think you're all going to find it very interesting, because it's an entity that still exists today that no one's talking about. So you'll definitely want to tune in for that. And that's on the Alpha Warrior Show tonight at 9:30 East Coast time. So you guys have a good evening. I will see you back at 9:30, and we will be back tomorrow. Let's see, tomorrow is Thursday, and I am going to be on Tommy's podcast. I'll send you out a link to that tomorrow at noon. And then Warhamster, if he's feeling up to it, we will do our Secret Society on Friday at noon. So take care, everyone. Have a nice evening, and I'll see you at 9:30. Take care. See you guys, 9:30. Take care.